Now, show. And remember, keep your mics muted. All right, showtime. All right, so the first theory we're going to go over, Piaget's. So Piaget's cognitive developmental theory. Okay. And there's two mnemonics that I suggest people utilize to remember the different theories and stages. So the mnemonic is stupid Piaget creates fuss, and some people can fly. And that is sensory motor, pre-operational, concrete operational, and then formal. So those are just the different stages. The S represents sensory motor, P for pre-operational, C for concrete, and then F for formal. So the first stage is, is sensory motor. Okay, stop capitalizing that. All right. So sensory motor, and then the age here we're looking at is 0 to 2 years old. So what does this actually look at? So this looks at how thought processes function within the use of symbols. So a lot of this is learning based on what they can associate things with. So motor connectivity without use of symbols is basically all things are learned based on experience. And then Piaget wanted to accomplish certain goals within each theory. So the main goal here that we're going to be looking at is object permanence. So what does that mean? And that is knowing something is there even when it is gone out of sight. And then key components here, or key learning ways that the child will learn, is through like body movement and use of senses. Because if you can imagine like a little infant, 0 to 2, they're not able to do a whole lot of movement. A lot of time is spent with the caregiver and or in a crib. So they're using their senses. And with that, just a couple little examples that I would introduce to make you guys associate sensory motor a little bit is like, imagine yourself walking into a room with a baby in a crib. The baby will be playing with its feet and looking around. In the same room, picture a child running around making making engine sounds with their toy car. So in this example, the child, so in this example, the young child playing with its feet symbolizes the use of senses to get familiar with the room. Well, I guess it wouldn't be a separate point. And the young child running around making engine noises symbolizes the engine, well, motor part of the name. So sensory motor. The young child playing with its feet symbolizes the senses, the use of senses to get acquainted to the room. And then the other one is looking at the motor part of it. And then another example that's a little higher in age is like, imagine yourself driving around in your car and you hear a sound coming from the motor. You will use your senses to get a sense, well, to get an idea of what is going on in this situation. And I'm sure you guys have done this. I've done this. Like, you hear something coming from your car, you turn the radio down, and you're like, man, I'm not a mechanic, but I think I could diagnose this. AKA, you can't, but you just want to get an idea, and it makes your mind feel better if you know that the sound is not as severe, even though you don't have any knowledge of it. So that is just reiterating the name of the sensory motor. So the second stage here, so stage 2, and I don't believe I put stage 1, so I'll do that now. So stage 1, sensory motor. Stage 2, pre-operational, and this is ages 2 to 7 years old. So what is happening here is during this stage, the young child can think about things symbolically. So a little more based on association of things. So this is the ability to make one thing, such as a word, well, don't put a dash, such as a word, object, or experience for something or other than the actual object. So they begin to associate specific behaviors or things with in themselves to associate it with, such as an example here, a child will see, well, will hear the ice cream truck music and associate it with getting ice cream, regardless of if it actually happens. So like the sound in of it itself does not mean ice cream, but the child begins to think that it symbolizes it. So this is where thinking, well, this is where thinking is still egocentric, which basically is fancy for, well, or being about themselves without consideration for others. So they basically, so they have a difficult time taking the perspective of other people. So if you think about young children, they don't really have the ability to see that, oh, I'm not able to get this right now, so I I need to get it regardless. So this is where they start to also develop language, memory, and imagination. So the imagination sense allows them to begin to associate things that aren't actually associated. So intelligence or thought processes are both egocentric, intuitive, or they can start believing something based on their feelings, even without conscious reasoning. Meaning, oh, well, I'm kind of hungry, I'd need to get food, rather than, oh, look, it's noon, I'm going to plan it. So it's more or less based on their feelings. So if they want something, they typically try to get it. So this is what, so the child may think that their nightlight will keep monsters away. So they're able to imagine things and they believe something based on their feelings rather than what's actually happening. So anyone that's not in that age group would be like, yeah, that nightlight's totally not doing anything. Or another example is like the child believes that since they thought about not wanting to be around their brother, and their brother ends up in the hospital, it is their fault since they thought about it. So things that aren't actually happening, and that is magical thinking. So they think that what they're doing is causing about it. And magical thinking is basically the idea that one's thoughts or desires influence the environment or situations that they are involved in. So they aren't actually able to have this direct influence, but they think that they do have powers that they don't actually do. So that's why it's considered magical thinking. And another component within this, so we can tap that in and then tap these in further, is this thought called symbolic functioning. So this is another milestone within this. And symbolic functioning is when a child learns through the use of mental images and other symbols that are not present. So that's where the sense of imagination becomes very powerful for that exact reason. So what does this look like? An example of this is a child will sing to their teddy bear to put it to sleep. Even though singing to it isn't really possible, they feel like since they saw someone else, when they get sung to, it puts them to sleep. So they apply that to the teddy bear, even though it doesn't have actual function. Another thing is the child will play doctor to a doll that fell off the bed. And that is based on every time that they have an injury, they go to a doctor. So they feel that even though the doll isn't an inanimate object, that it'll be able to help the functioning of the doll. So it's very like loosely associated, but that is the way that they learn, based on what they know. So to summarize that stage, a little imagery to remember that. So imagine you are babysitting a child in their, well, they are pretending to be a nurse to help cure a broken leg on their doll that broke off from falling off the couch earlier that day. So this is an example. Whoops. Of symbolic function. Remember, whoops. They apply things to things that aren't actually there. And another imagery is like, imagine you are the person in the first scenario where you had car trouble. So bringing that back, the person begins to think that if they were more nice to their significant other that morning, that their car would not have broken down. And I guess in the chat, I'd have you type in what ideology that is. Any ideas? Only Misty? Only Misty knows? All right. So the example that I just provided, imagine you're the first person in the first scenario where you had car trouble. The person begins to think that if they were more nice to their significant other that morning, that their car would not have broken down. What is that an example of? I guess not more nice. They were nicer. Yes, yes. Now you guys, yes. So that would be an example of magical thinking. Bango. Yes. So that is where, yes. Now you guys are getting, okay. I was gonna say, hopefully I didn't lose you guys. So now we're looking at the next stage. So stage 3, concrete, operational. And this is the age 7 to 11. So what's happening in here is they are beginning to develop logical or operational type thinking. So little caveat here, they can only apply their critical thinking to objects. So that's important that they're able to do it. So, but it's only to objects. So that's where concrete is super important. My study material calls it formal operational. Molly, that's the last stage. Concrete comes before formal. So I'll get to that. Don't worry. Don't worry. So what is happening here? The child can work things out internally in their head rather than having to directly experience the situation. Which I guess you could imagine it at this age it's probably good, because if people had to experience situations directly, we'd have a lot more people that were getting hurt. Oh wow, walking in front of cars is not a good idea. So I'm going to just actually stay here. So beyond that, they can begin to start playing games with real rules because they are able to see the connection of why they are in place, which makes it a lot easier. And with that being said, they are able to see cause and effect type relationships, i.e., if I get angry and punch that wall, it could hurt my hand. When before as a kid, you wouldn't really think, oh, that wall's super hard. So they'd just punch the wall and then they'd lose the function in their hand. So key conceptions here are, so the main components here are conservation and classification. And what do those mean? So classification is basically the ability to identify properties I literally just lost train of thought. Yeah, sorry. So that is, yeah, sorry. Just literally lost train of thought. So the ability to understand that when something is split into different parts, that it remains the same object, which in another way is ability to identify properties of categories rather than having to see it in a whole and it getting split. So ability to critically think and construct things. So with that, conservation is the understanding that something stays the same in quantity even when its appearance changes. Such as, so an example of this is like putting water into a bigger bottle and it appearing less. And then classification, yeah. So if you've ever seen a child, you put it into a bigger glass. Yeah, that is conservation, not conversation. Sorry. So yeah, to reiterate that, classification is when you split things into different quantities and people are able to say, oh, that's still a whole. So if I go and smash a brick on the ground, a child's going to say, oh, that's still a brick, not, oh, those are just rocks. And then conservation is when something is put into a bigger or smaller container and they're able to say, okay, yeah, it's still the same object. Meaning I have a gallon of water, I put it into a 5-gallon pail. It looks less than it did before, but it is ultimately the same. And that's the ability to get things around with that. And Yes. Any questions on that at all? No, no. Okay. Okay. So with that, we move on to the next stage, which is formal operations. So fourth one, stage 4, formal operations. And this is 11 years old on to adolescence. Okay. So if a child has a candy bar and it's broken into several pieces, is this conservation? That'd be classification. Yes, so that'd be classification, Chrissy. So stage 4, yeah. On to adolescence, and this is where a child develops the ability to think about abstract concepts. So they get a little more critical thinking. So this is their ability to plan for the future. And this is where they think, so they begin to think hypothetically. If this happens, then this. And that leads us to the concept of hypothetical deductive reasoning. And what exactly is that tricky little term? And that's ability to think the ability to think abstractly through generating predictive measures of hypothesis. So stated, someone is basically able to come up with very different hypothetical situations, being able to think through a situation and come up with solutions to decide on a better outcome. So through that, we then get to construct when thinking through life decisions. It allows for a pros and cons list to be identified physically or cognitively. And I just realized I didn't do the little imagery thing for the last stage, so let me go back to that after I finish this one. So a way to remember this, so imagine, the formal is to imagine someone preparing for a formal dance. They think of how they want to go with Susan. However, if they go with Susan, they will likely have to meet at her house and take pictures with all of her family before leaving. They would have to decide whether it is worth it or not to go with Susan. So they think it through. They're like, hey, I know Susan has a massive family. I have to take pictures. I hate taking pictures, but I want to take Susan. So then they have to weigh their options. And another situation for this age group is, like, imagine someone wants to buy a video game from the store. That cost $50. The child knows that they can get $25 from their parents each week when they do their chores. Therefore, they would need to do chores for 2 weeks to get their game. So then they have to decide, is doing my chores worth getting this game or not? So formal operations is where they have to be able to think through things and come up with critical solutions to those. And the little imagery that I pose for concrete, since I kind of skipped over that and didn't realize that, so I apologize for that, guys. So imagine that you see a group of children playing with some concrete blocks. One of them throws a concrete block at the ground and yells, "Be careful. I am on a mission and do not want anyone to get an operation." So when the kid throws a block, the concrete block, he yells he doesn't want to get an operation, so the kids run away. And this emphasizes that, well, the name concrete operations, well, concrete operational, and that they are able to see danger when it comes to objects. Because remember, they're only able to apply to objects, so kids fiddling around, and he doesn't want anyone to get operations. And then I guess the second example that could do it is, imagine kids playing and they accidentally break a concrete block into pieces and try to put it back together, and a parent yells at them, "You better fix this or I will get you an operation," to bring it home that it's concrete operational. And they were actually doing like classification there because they were trying to put it back together, even though it was still not in its all-tune form. And yes, so another key thing and concepts here that are like supplemental, I suppose, is assimilation. Well, if I could type tonight, guys. And then accommodation. And there are two things that people develop and go through out this, and this is assimilation is adding a new idea, behavior, or activity into a person's life, and their identity is not lost from the introduction of the new ideologies. So an example of this, chef learns a new recipe. Someone gets a degree. Well, someone passes their LCSW. Exam, yet still hangs out with their other friends. They don't just leave and only hang out with LCSWs. They stay true to who they are. And another key thing that I always highlight for people is the two S's in assimilation drives home that the client stays the same. So the two S's stays the same signifies that the person gets the stuff introduced, but they stay the same. And then accommodation, which is the other concept, is changing or altering current schemas, or fancy for thought processes, in a response to new information. So someone gets new information, a behavior or activity introduced to them, and they change who they are based on the new X. And then example, this is someone believes that all dogs are bad since they had a bad experience when they were a child. And when they got older, they had a good interaction with a dog, and it changed their schema to believe not all dogs are bad, just some of them. So the accommodation there would be the change in perspective of dogs due to a new experience with them. And another example, a child knows that clowns have red hair. So when they see someone with red hair, they believe it is a clown. However, with exposure to people who have red hair, they begin, to realize not everyone with red hair is a clown. So the accommodation here they went from thinking everyone with red hair is a clown to knowing not everyone who has red hair is a clown. And then a third piece of information is the two C's. So it's no mistake that I did the two S's last time. So the two C's here symbolize client changes. So the two S's meant the client stays the same. Here, the two C's symbolizes the client changes. So accommodation, they change to whatever information that they were introduced to rather than staying the same. So with that, does PJ make sense to everyone before I move on to the next? So if it doesn't make sense, type no in the chat, and if it does, just say yes. Okay. So I'm going to do Kohlberg's next. Is that okay with everyone? I guess type Kohlberg if you're okay with it, and then type Erickson's if Erickson's is where you want to go. Either. All right. Let's buckle down and see what Kohlberg has to say. So we're getting a little bit moral on us, guys. So different type of little vibe. So Kohlberg. So it's Kohlberg's theory of moral development. And this is 6 stages, 3 levels. And I just realized I forgot something on PJs, so I'm going to go back. Because there are mnemonics to remember the ages. So age mnemonics. That just came to my mind. So stage 1 is 0 to 2. And the thing is, stage starts between 0 and 2 is, and well, 0 and 2 is when it ends. And then next stage, so stage 2 is 2 to 7. And the little ditty. So it starts at 2 and takes until 7 to become operational, because remember that's concrete up. I mean, just pre-operational. And then stage 3, which is 7 to 11. It requires that we pay a fee at our local 7-Eleven made out of concrete. So that, remember, it's the concrete operational stage. And then stage 4, the formal stage, which is, well, 11 beyond. So the little ditty here, we open the door for our date around 11 at the formal dance. Bingo. All right, so that's the age mnemonic, because formal, operational, concrete, operational. All right, now back to Kohlberg. Sorry, I just wanted to make sure that was there and on your guys' sheet as well, so that way I didn't leave you guys empty-handed. All right, so now Kohlberg has 6 stages, 3 different levels. So with this, level 1 is pre-conventional morality. And this is before 9 years old. I'm going to move that out. Yeah. I'm going to move this over too. So that way we have a lot more space. So this first stage is stage 1. And this is obedience and punishment orientation. So what happens here? Wow, why did that just jump hella far away? Hang on, let me line this up. Good, all right. So the child is given, well, the child behaves in a good manner to avoid being punished. So if the person, well, if the child is punished, then they must have done something wrong. So an example, oh, that was weird. So an example here would be a 4th grade girl refrains from running in the hallway in order to avoid breaking any school rules. So she knows it's bad, so she just refrains from doing it in general because she does not want to be deemed in a bad light. Another example is a young boy will behave himself in the store to avoid being yelled at by his mother. Another example. So we have perceived, and then another perceived. A young child will behave themselves at their relative's house to avoid getting their iPad taken from them. So they're good for the sake of getting some type of thing kept within them. They just don't want to be in trouble. And then the next stage is stage 2, which is the individuation. Well, individualism and exchange, sorry. And what does this look like? So the child will recognize there's more than one way of doing something correctly, and often will cling onto the response handed down to them by a figure of authority. However, they're able to acknowledge that essentially different individuals have different rules that they want you to follow. And that is often based on their own values and views. So interest begins to shift to rewards rather than trying to avoid getting, rather than avoid punishment for their behaviors. So effort is made to secure the greatest possible reward. They start to think, oh wow, I do this, I can get this, and then this, and then this. And then because of that, they will begin to conform their rules / principles to benefit themselves. So an example of this would be child may help out parents do dishes even though they do not like doing them, to have their friend stay the night. So they may not like doing the dishes, but they like the reward that they can get from doing the dishes. And we see this a lot in it. So another one is someone may not want to study for their exam. However, they know that if they do so, they have higher likelihood of passing, which leads to getting their license. So they may not want to study for the ASWB exam, but like, man, I need to buckle down if I want to get this license. So they do it anyhow. And I'm sure there's some people in here that are like, yeah, that's totally me, which I don't blame you, but you can also be in these different stages based on what your interest and concerns and goals are, which leads us to get into the next level. So level 2 is the conventional morality. And this is the stage of most adolescents and adults. So this encompasses a big thing, but keep in mind different levels, different stages and stuff like that. So it's pretty tricky to do it. But this is where we look at, so a person begins to internalize the moral standards or values of the people they consider significant in their life. And thus, authority is internalized, but not questioned, and reasoning is based on the norms of the group in which the person identifies with. So unless crazy terms, the person will begin to follow the rules and guidelines for the social groups they occupy. So unless technical-ish terms, So an example to bring it home is someone may start listening to podcasts if people around them do so. So they can fit in with that social group. So they may have zero interest in the podcast initially, but they start listening to them so they can be part of that social group and say, hey, I do this too, guys. And another one is a group of social workers start to study for their exams, and one of them does not have interest in taking their exam. However, so that they can fit into the group, they begin preparing for the exam as well. So kind of peer pressure in this realm, it's kind of in a positive realm. So, which will lead us into stage 3. So that was an introduction of the entire level. This is the specific levels or stages within that level. So the first stage, conformity and interpersonal accord / good interpersonal relationships. Oops. And I'm just going to toggle all of this in so that way it's not confusing within that. So with this, what stage does this look like? So the child or individual is good in order to be able, to be seen as a good person by others. So they seek the approval of others based on their actions. So they'll kind of conform. And this is the good girl / good boy level. Doing things to get acceptance. And within this stage, the effort is put forth to secure approval or maintain friendly relations with others of interest. So they wouldn't do behaviors that would just be essentially within that. So an example would be stealing is bad, and if I steal, people will consider me a bad person. And then another example, someone may think drinking and driving is a bad behavior, so they avoid doing it to ensure people do not consider them a bad person. So it's all based on what other people are going to say about them. So then the next stage within that is authority in social order. So what is this? This is where the child or individual becomes more aware of the wider rules of society. So judgment is concerned with obeying the rules in order to uphold social and, well, social order and avoid guilt of breaking the rules. So this is where someone starts to actually think like, wow, I have a larger obligation to society that I cannot neglect. So someone's orientation or conduct begins to shift towards fixed rules. So the purpose of morality, not mortality, morality, is maintaining the social order. So interpersonal accord is expanded to include leaps, to include the entire society. So with that, the person may obey laws and fulfill societal obligations and duties to maintain social systems. So an example of all of this is I am personally against violence, but would never protest at the library without permission. So I wouldn't just march into a quiet library and start doing my thing because there's a societal expectation that libraries are going to be quiet, or they're a place for sound reasoning rather than me just roaming in and doing wild things. And then another example, I'm personally against the attendance policy at work, but will still check with my boss when I am going to violate it. So I don't care for the policy, but I'm letting someone know because I feel like I have an obligation to to follow it because I don't want anyone to go without it based on my own actions. Which then leads us to a new level, level 3, which is the last level, post-conventional morality, which branches in whoa, that's not what I want to do. Which then branches in that the individual becomes aware that while rules are important and exist for a reason, the good of the greater number of people need to be kept in mind while making decisions. So since some laws and rules are against the interest of particular people, thus action is done to dissemble the unjust. So this is the type of person that is going to say that the issues are not clean cut and one size does not fit all. So most social workers are going to fit into this. So like we're always looking for a mutual benefit and reciprocity for everyone involved. So if someone does something that they need to get the same result as someone else, regardless of where they come from or who they are. So this is morally right and legal. Do not always equate to the same thing. So what is morally correct and what is legally correct don't always hang true. So that is where we have the ulterior, well, that's an A. Yeah, okay. So the ulterior rules, which essentially make everything equal and better for everyone. And this is where someone has a genuine interest in the welfare of others, concerned with individual rights in being morally correct. So an example here would be like Schindler during World War II. So those that don't know about Schindler was a German individual that employed people that were Jewish so that way they didn't have to be thrown into the Holocaust. So he saw that, yes, we're not supposed to have people of the Jewish descent work for us during that time. However, I'm going to do it anyway because it's morally correct rather than legality correct of doing that. And another example of this would be a social worker seeing someone that isn't scheduled to ensure that they are stable. So legally or ethically, we're not really supposed to see people when they're not scheduled due to like billing purposes, but you can go beyond that and say, well, this is defending this person's actual well-being, and I need to uphold that beyond whatever the rules are. So our code of ethics actually says that. However, legally or like billing purposes, it would not be going through. So here we're thinking beyond of what is supposed to be within this, and we're stepping out and advancing that. So we have a more concern on what the person needs rather than what by the book it says, which leads us into the last and final So the universal principle. Wow, if my mind would actually type. And this is stage 6. So we've gone through 6 stages, 3 levels. And this, well, it's universal principles. And what does this one actually entail? So people at this stage have developed their own set of rules, morals, and guidelines for how things should look for society. And this may or may not align with the law. So again, society may have some backlash with all of this. However, human rights, justice, and equality are key components here. So this is where the person will be prepared to act and to defend the principles, even if it means going against the rest of society. So very few people reach this level, if you can imagine. This is very like sacrificial type things, which means they are willing to pay consequences for their actions and disapproval, which could mean imprisonment. So these are people that are like 1 in a million type examples. However, a huge example of this is Martin Luther King Jr. When he was fighting for civil rights and equality for everyone, he was willing to go to jail. He was like, take me in. I think this injustice is not correct, and I want to see something done about it. So you can take me to jail if you need to. You can take my life, but I am ultimately going to fight. So he saw an injustice and sacrificed his well-being as well as potential opportunities for himself to make sure that an issue is rectified. And another example of this would be like Gandhi. Gandhi was willing to fight his life. He was willing to do anything that it took for there to be equality amongst the races and for violence to stop for his people. So he was in the universal. He was like, I don't care, you do whatever you want to me, but at the end of the day, I'm going to strive and I'm going to thrive to get what I need and for the overall good of my people. So that is Kohlberg's theory. Does anyone have any questions at all based on that? Okay. Which leads us into good old Erickson's. So what is the second stage and fifth stage? Stage 3, stage 4. No. Will you be going over Mueller's? No. Yeah, so that's stage 3. Stage 4. And then yeah. Okay. Boom. So this was stage 5. Okay. Okay. So Erickson's 8 stages of development. So first one, trust versus mistrust. And this is looking at ages 0 to 1. And this is where the child begins to gain confidence and trust based on the feedback from the caregiver. And dude, these things are, I'm not sure what happened with that. But so this is where a positive result or success, because there's success and there's fail within Erickson's. So success here is security and confidence in their ability to maintain safety. And then failure, well, I guess negative. Okay. And failure would be child will have a sense of fear around the world and can cause heightened anxiety within this. And other considerations with it is a child is very questionable of what others may do. They keep a close connection to their caregiver, or if possible, if they're present. And then beyond the sense of safety is a child is able to understand that a caregiver will be there for them and to take care of their needs. So beyond a security thing, it provides reassurance to them that they're there. And the main thing here is they're trying to gain a sense of who they can trust and who they can't trust. So they might have like some skepticism, and then which means the child is unsure whether they can trust their caregiver to take care of their needs. So if the trust is not established there, they're going to be a little skeptical of what's going about to go on. So the second one is autonomy versus shame, which is we're looking at 1 to 3 years old here. And what does this actually look like? The child begins to roam away from parents, well, from the caregiver, and then we'll put the caveat of multiple / parents if the parents are there, yet they keep them close to ensure safety. And then within that, the child begins to assert independence by walking away from their caregiver and making decisions such as picking out clothing, food, and activities. Wow. So what is so remember, success / positive would be child gains more confidence in their abilities to choose what is best for them. And said another way, a child is able to start gaining a sense of trust in themselves to operate on their own. And then failure / negative is where we're looking at child is anxious and unsure of their abilities and may rely on others for reassurance around what they can do. Or said in another way, a child questions what they are doing and becomes dependent on others to make decisions for them. Which then leads us into the next initiative, verse guilt. And this is where we're looking at 3 to 6. Oops. Years old. And in this stage, a child begins to plan activities for themselves and will begin to share / play with other children. Or the child begins to engage and play with others in attempts to seek out friendships. So they're starting to get things going, and they will start completing tasks on their own in developing a sense of accomplishment. So positive here, / success. I should just for the simplicity of keeping it consistent, success will always come first. So what does this look like? A child develops a sense of confidence in their ability to engage, develop peer relationships, and sense of connection. And then failure / negative result in this would be someone questioning, well, child questions their ability to engage with others and may isolate or become easily angered, anxious, or depressed. They will depend on others to guide them. They can believe they are a nuisance to others. And then our next one, industry versus inferiority. And this is 6 to 12 years old. And this is when the child begins to develop a sense of pride around their accomplishments. They initiate projects and see them through completion. They're actually able to stay focused and get it done. They also will be able to seek out peer relationships based on similar interests. To gain a sense of connection with others. Which also looks like they will begin to take on projects in particular areas of interest to advance themselves. Success or positive here is going to be looking along the lines of child is able to make connections with others and take a sense of pride in the projects they complete. Confidence is increased. Continuation on their mission of independence. Oh, wow. Hands get away from you, and then you start typing the stuff backwards. So this is where they also begin to feel productive and see a sense of drive when working on goals. So failure slash negative stage here would look like child begins to feel less than or inferior to their counterpart. Whoops, that chat's in the way, sorry. Counterparts, and will doubt their ability to complete basic tasks. Or they will also feel isolated from their peers and feel like they are less than them, which will cause them to isolate and engage with peers who are not as positive for them, increased anxiety. Which then leads us into the next stage, the fifth stage, ego identity. B, role confusion. And then here we're looking at 12 to 18 years old. In this stage, someone will seek out tasks that they normally would not, to begin to develop a sense of what works for them and what does not. They attempt to find their strengths and weaknesses. So an example here, someone will join a football team when they have never tried it to see if they like it and are good at it. Which then leads us into the success slash positive and then failure slash negative. So then this, a success is when someone will identify a specific task, specific path they would like to take in life, such as career, social groups, and economic situation. An additional components there would be they identify who they are and where they would like to go in the future. And a negative or failure here is when someone does not develop a sense of identity and relies on others to tell them what is best for them. So they are unsure of their purpose. And they will mold to any expectations people have for them. Which leads us to the sixth, which is intimacy. V, isolation, which the age here, 18 to 40 years old. And what's happening here is someone will begin to seek out relationships or connections beyond their family. Someone will practice what they would like to see for themselves. So a lot of experimenting / isolating from different people. So it's a mix and match of what you would like to see. And they attempt to develop relationships and connections beyond their immediate family. So success / positive result here would be person feels comfortable with seeking and maintaining relationships and can accept rejection from others. They are comfortable with a sense of commitment and can care for someone else. And then a failure or negative interaction within the stage would be someone has a sense of self-doubt and they feel like they do not belong with people around them. They have a lack of connection in areas they deem important. So they will avoid intimacy at all costs and feels lonely and depressed. So that in the seventh, generativity versus stagnation, which is 40 to 65 years old. And what's happening here is the person begins to establish their career and settle down with a family. They develop a sense of being a part of something that is bigger than them. Peeps. So they develop a family and network of people that they show pride in being a part of. So a success or positive interaction here is someone will have a fulfilling career, family, and home life. They have developed with people they are happy to know, and they are attempting to empower the next generation in the family. So the failure slash negative interaction that we're looking at here is someone does not value what they do and feel like they are not contributing to society. They lack a sense of self-esteem, anxiety, creeps. Wow, that text box gets in the way sometimes. Anxiety and depression. So this person is someone that what they do, they don't really like it. Who they become, they don't really like it. And they avoid any opportunity to be a part of the community because they feel like what they do would not contribute or make it better. So this is where we have the 8th and final stage, integrity v. despair. And this is where we're looking at age 65 plus. So this is anyone that isn't 65 years old or higher, or they exhibit this. Some people can be more advanced in their stages, but at the end of the day, what they're exhibiting is exactly what dictates what stage. So the person starts to slow down productivity and begins to reflect on their life work. Well, I guess life's work and accomplishments. So this is where they're taking a deep dive into who they are and where they came from, and do they accomplish and are they proud where they come from. So, and where they've come. So this is where someone begins to reflect on their life and deem it worthwhile or like they could have done more. So you'll sometimes hear people say like, man, I wish I would have done more in my days, or dang, I wish I could have done this. But you can't dwell on that spilled milk, folks. So what does a success look like? Well, yeah, success comes first. And positive. So this is someone feels like what they have done has helped advance their career field as well as empowered / enabled other people to do the same. They take pride in their efforts. So what does failure or negative look like? So someone feels like what they have done is not enough and like they have wasted their time and potential. So a person may experience a lot of self-doubt, regret, and resentment. So out of that, does that make sense? So I noticed that as I was going through, there was a lot of chat. I just wanted to make sure that I got through it due to the timing. I know I wrote down following. Yeah, I did do a previous YouTube video on this. I just expounded a little further. I've reviewed these series numerous times, but my anxiety is extremely high after looking confused as a pretty individual. Yes. Is there a group on Skype to communicate who are studying? That was a lot. Yes. So it was a lot. It was a decent amount, a lot. Yeah, here's lots of info and don't know how to keep your theory straight. Yeah, so that's why I send you guys the materials as well as like the recording, so that way you guys can go back and look over it and comb it. In the Skype groups that you guys signed up for, I do keep those up. So if you want to communicate with each other based on that, and if you guys are interested, I guess I could just make a like Phil's group in general, so that way we just have like one that just is consistent. You guys can keep up and just like keep in contact. So any questions about the particular Erickson's theory? Because I do have a mnemonic to remember all of that stuff. So don't worry about that. Okay. None. Perfect. All right. So then we have mnemonic. Always mess that up. Okay. So the first level is to remember the positive side. So trust, autonomy, to initiate, the industry, identify, intimacy, and generate integrity. How deep do they go? And then the one side, so the positive side is here. The negative side or the failure side is mistrust, shame, and mistrust, shame, guilt, and inferiority can cause role confusion and makes someone isolate from stagnation, which leads to despair. So all the capital letters are the side. So that is the mnemonic to remember the stages. So trust versus mistrust, autonomy versus shame, initiative versus guilt, industry versus inferiority, identity v role confusion, intimacy versus isolation, generativity versus stagnation, and then integrity versus despair. Yeah. Oh yeah. I'm still gonna do practice questions. So don't worry about that, guys. I did not those that have been rocking with me know that I sometimes just get too in depth with it, and I know that is a curse that I have, but I do apologize for the time. So age group. So the age groups even have their own little mnemonic. So the first one is, so it starts at 0 and ends at 1. The second stage is stage 2 is between 1 and 3, because that's 1 and 3 years old. And then the third one, so stage 3 starts at 3 and ends on the double, which is 6. Well, not plus 6, is 6. And then fourth one, stage 4. So that industry starts at 6 and breaks at 12, because it's from 6 to 12. And that is stage 5, which is intimacy versus role confusion. In the little ditty is adolescence, is when identity is confusing. Phew. And then the 6, stage 6, so 18 to 40 is a lovely time to isolate. 7th, stage 7, if you generate enough from 40 to 65, you can retire. And then the 8th, so the 8th stage, at 65, you can have some integrity and avoid despair. So those are the mnemonics to remember those. So any last minute questions that you guys have based on the theories? Because after this, I'm going to turn off the recording, whip out the practice questions, have you guys walk through those, and then roam, identify what you guys would like to see for the next group, and then go from there. And if you don't have any questions, just say, no, I don't. And we can get skedaddled. Okay. So I will turn the recording off